So let's talk a little bit about ubiquitin. So we've talked about what happens when proteins are made, so when they're being born. But then the cell has to be able to get rid of proteins after they have fulfilled their role, which may be very soon, or maybe they're very long-lived proteins, or because those proteins might be damaged, maybe unfolded in such a state that they cannot be folded. There's a variety of reasons why the cell wants to get rid of some proteins. In that case, the cell is going to have to recognize proteins that have to be destroyed. By destruction, I mean to be chopped up into single amino acids. All right? We're not going to obliterate them into atoms. We're going to simply cut the peptide bonds to recycle those amino acids. So the cell has to be able to distinguish a protein that is not folded properly. How does it do that? Because it has exposed hydrophobic amino acids, right? So can HSP70 bind to it? Yes, we just talked about that. So HSP70 can bind to that and try to fold it. But if HSP70 cannot fold it, those amino acids will continue to be exposed. So that continued exposure will be recognized by other proteins that will also recognize hydrophobic patches, right? And then say, okay, this is a protein that needs to be destroyed, right? Can that other system bind to a baby protein that just happens to be in the process of folding, but it was recognized by this destruction machinery? The answer is absolutely yes. It's identical situation. The proteins don't know that this is a baby protein, this is an older protein. They will bind it, mark it for destruction, and it's gone. Too bad. All right? It happens, and it happens quite a bit. The cell can afford that waste of energy, right? But it's there because it's very important, really important, to be able to get rid of any proteins that are constitutively, constantly misfolded. There are other proteins that are not misfolded at all. They're perfectly good, but the cell doesn't want them anymore. So we need to recognize them. Can we use hydrophobic patches to recognize this? No, they're folded properly. Right? They're a nice, healthy, vibrant, future ahead of it protein. It just needs to be get rid of. Right? So we need to have other proteins that recognize that protein specifically to say, okay, that needs to go. Right? So that we have to have a recognition system, and then we have to have a marking system that is going to tag those proteins for destruction. So whichever way we recognize them and tag, the tag that we use is this tiny little protein called ubiquitin. Ubiquitin was named because it's ubiquitous. It's found in all organisms, in all eukaryotic organisms. There's something similar in bacteria as well. Tiny protein, only 76 amino acids long. It's really hard to encode for a messenger RNA that small. So the gene encoding this encodes for a protein that has many copies in tandem of this 76 amino acid sequence, identical, repeated many times. It gets produced, and then there's an enzyme that cleaves in between each of the units, and that releases individual ubiquitin proteins. And this protein is going to be tagged covalently to the protein that needs to be destroyed. And then when you attach not one ubiquitin, but a chain of ubiquitins, as shown in this diagram, polyubiquitin chain like that, that is the tag that marks that protein for destruction in a special destruction chamber called the proteasome. The proteasome is nothing more than a barrel, cylindrical, that has protease sites, enzymatic sites that recognize peptide bonds and cleave peptide bonds. You don't want to have enzymes that cleave peptide bonds free floating in the cytoplasm, chopping everything up. So you put them in a barrel. Think of it as the garbage disposal. Right? And only when you put things through it's going to get chopped up into amino acids. So here's the active site of the proteasome. It is capped at both ends by a special cap, a proteasome cap, that has two important functions. Number one, it recognizes that polyubiquitin chain, so it has a binding pocket for that polyubiquitin chain to say, okay, you are tagged, bind here. And then it has, right at this end, it has an enzyme that does the opposite of the chaperone proteins. Chaperone proteins fold. There's an enzyme here that causes the denaturation, the unfolding of proteins. I think I have, is a couple slides down the road, there's a protein called unfoldase. You don't need to know all of these steps. It's just there for illustration of how it uses the energy of ATP to forcibly unfold the proteins, and going back to this diagram, unfolds them and then feed that undenatured polypeptide through the chamber so that then it gets attacked by those enzymes and cut up into amino acids. This is symmetrical, so you can enter proteins from either end. And I have a movie to illustrate its function. So here's the proteasome. The red is the cylinder with the enzymes. The caps are in green, and this protein has been tagged with a polyubiquitin chain. So there it is. Recognizes the polyubiquitin chain, and it doesn't work like that, but you get the idea that it unfolds the protein, feeds it through the cylinder, and then it gets cut up into amino acids or short little peptides. Right? So they get recycled. What about ubiquitin itself? And this I don't think I have a diagram, but it's shown here. The ubiquitin protein itself is not destroyed in the proteasome. The cap also cleaves all the individual ubiquitin molecules and releases them back to be reused in new rounds of protein degradation. Right? So when you want a protein to be destroyed, you tag with ubiquitin, and the proteasome takes care of that. So that's the easy part. The hard part is to understand how does the cell recognize and tag specific proteins to be destroyed. So for that, cells have to have a much complex system of proteins to do all the recognition and tagging. Right? So, in dealing with ubiquitin. So ubiquitin by itself is just a protein that doesn't have any enzymatic activity at all. So how do you use it? So we have to use the energy of ATP to produce a activated form of ubiquitin. Let me skip to the next slide to go here. What we want to do, this is our goal, and we're going to come back to this. We want to covalently attach ubiquitin to a lysine amino acid side chain on the target protein. All right? That's our goal. We need to form that covalent bond between ubiquitin and the target protein. That requires energy. That energy is going to be provided at the very first step in this slide. So there's an enzyme called E1, or ubiquitin activating enzyme, whose sole role is to bind to free-floating ubiquitin molecules, and using hydrolysis of ATP, the energy of that hydrolysis, it forms a covalent bond between ubiquitin and itself. So it tags itself with ubiquitin, with only one though, not a chain, so it's safe. Right. And that is by forming a bond that is almost resembles a peptide bond. What is a peptide bond? A peptide bond is a bond between a carboxyl unit and an amino unit. from neighboring amino acids, and that covalent bond is a peptide bond. Well, here we have a bond between a sulfhydryl group, where is it go? Here. It's a sulfhydryl group on a amino acid side chain, which is called, which amino acid has a sulfhydryl group as a side chain? Cysteine. So there's a cysteine right there, specific cysteine, that will form a covalent bond between the carboxyl terminus of ubiquitin, the last amino acid, its carboxyl terminus, forms a covalent bond right there between carbon and sulfur using the energy of ATP. And this is a very high energy, it keeps a lot of that energy of ATP in that bond. So E1 is said to have activated that ubiquitin and is ready to be transferred to the next step. E1, its role is to just bind ubiquitin and activate it. Then it donates it to the next step, which is smartly called E2. Right? E2 is part of the ubiquitin ligase. So here's E1 binding to E2, which also has a sulfhydryl group from a cysteine. So E1 is going to transfer that ubiquitin to that E2 from the exact same bond and donating a little bit of that energy in that process. So now we have a complex of what we call a ubiquitin ligase that is prime and ready to find a target. It's carrying a ubiquitin that is ready to be transferred, and it has a binding pocket right here on this subunit, which is E3, and this binding pocket is the one that is going to recognize the target protein. That's going to, the job of E3 is to recognize who is going to get tagged. So here we have the example. We have a target protein that has, perhaps this is a hydrophobic patch because it's the nature. Let's just say that, right? Is the nature has a hydrophobic patch that couldn't be folded by HSP70, and this E3 recognizes that, so it binds to it and brings the protein close to E2, so E2 can reach to any close by amino acid, lysine amino acid. This is a lysine that has NH2 side chain at the end, and transfer the ubiquitin right there on top. Again, covalent bond. Now this is a bond between a carboxyl group and an amino group. So that is going to be very much like a peptide bond, but it's not a true peptide bond. So they call it an isopeptide bond. So it's right there. But one ubiquitin is not enough as a signal. So we have to bring then another E1 on top right here to donate a second ubiquitin. And then E2 transfers that second ubiquitin, not to the target, but it covalently binds it on top of a lysine on the first ubiquitin. And then we repeat the cycle a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, all the way to about 11 or 10 or 11 ubiquitins in a chain. Once that's accomplished, it's released and is degraded in the proteasome. So we have in our genome only a few genes for E1, because E1's job is only to recognize ubiquitin and use energy of ATP to activate it. But then we have a whole bunch of E2s that can combine with many E3s to give you a huge collection of combinatorial sites to recognize many, many different types of substrates. So you can have always the same E1 working with any E2, but this E2 can work with this E3 to recognize that substrate, or that E2 might bind to that E3 to recognize this other substrate, and that way you can cover your bases for all the proteins in the cell. So that's how we control that. Before you go, you have to do this as homework, and I'm going to ask Gustavo to talk about it and ask you this question in a discussion session next week. All right? It's an experimental basis of what happens when you mess around with this process.